Hey, it's Ron, and I want to tell you a story about business and how that story changed everything. He had stamped approved on plenty of patent applications before. Lamps, levers, gears, endless contraptions that float across his desk in a steady gray stream. The patent office in Washington, D.C. wasn't glamorous, and his job wasn't glamorous either. But it gave him a front row seat to what America was dreaming up, and just as often, what it was trying to claim before anyone else could. On that morning, the file in front of him looked familiar. Not the invention that it was describing, but the name, Thomas A. Edison. The man submitted applications the way other people submitted letters to the post office. So what's this? It's another version of an electric lamp. He'd seen dozens, maybe hundreds. Everyone wanted to tame electricity, to bottle it, to turn it into something more than laboratory theater. The clerk checked the diagrams: carbonized filament, high resistance, a sealed glass globe. The sketches weren't beautiful, but they were clear, and Edison's submission had something many didn't: meticulous testing notes, cross-references, supporting affidavits. Someone had put real structure behind this. So the clerk dipped his stamp, pressed it down, and stamped the document approved. It felt like any other filing on any other day. It wasn't until a couple weeks later that letters started arriving. Challenges from competitors, investors trying to confirm what they had heard, reporters asking whether the rumors were true, all because of that one approval. From his small desk in a crowded office, he was beginning to realize he hadn't just processed a patent. He'd just validated a business blueprint, one about to pull an entire industry into a new era. But how does a routine stamp in a crowded federal office end up shaping the business model for an entire new industry? Why would one inventor's paperwork trigger a flood of competitors, investors, and speculation overnight? And on January 27, 1880, how did a single approved patent push the electric age from experiment to enterprise? From Business Basics, I'm Ron Trucks, and this is Business History, the daily podcast where we explain the stories that changed business forever. Every date of the year has a story where business reshaped the world. Today, January 27th, that story takes us to 1880, the patent that powered the pitch. If you've never heard of it, a place called Menlo Park will always be associated with the famous man Thomas A. Edison. But it's important to understand that Menlo Park was never the lonely workshop people imagine, and it certainly wasn't hidden in some remote wilderness. It sat in central New Jersey, about an hour outside of New York City, on what was essentially a small industrial campus. Several connected buildings, workrooms, storerooms, drafting spaces, and a long, narrow main lab that often stayed lit until dawn. It wasn't massive, but it was big enough to house a full team of specialists and enough equipment to make most universities jealous. For the most part, it was the world's first research and development complex to operate like a factory. Dozens of assistants worked in shifts, running tests, logging results, machining parts, and building whatever Edison's mind sketched out next. Chemists, mathematicians, machinists, and general assistants moved through the space in a kind of organized chaos. Ideas didn't live in notebooks, they lived across benches, and prototypes and experiments stacked too deep against the wall. It's important to understand, Edison didn't pretend that he did it all by himself. He once said, "I am more of a sponge than an inventor. I absorb ideas and make them work." That line gets closer to the truth than the myth of the solitary genius. He defined the problem, directed the effort, pushed the pace, and made the call on what moved forward. But the hands doing the thousands of filament tests, those belonged to the team. And something else to understand, competition was fierce. Electric lighting wasn't new. Dozens of inventors had been working on lamps before Edison filed anything. Some were crude, some were dangerous, some surprisingly good. What none of them had was a system, a way to produce the lamp, power it, wire it, and sell it to the public at scale. That's where Menlo Park mattered. Edison wasn't inventing in a vacuum. He was building the first industrial machine designed to turn invention into infrastructure. Long before January 27th arrived, the real breakthrough wasn't the bulb, it was the operation behind it. Getting that patent approved didn't trigger overnight change, and it certainly didn't mean Edison's team suddenly dropped everything else they were working on. Menlo Park was always juggling multiple projects: telegraph upgrades, telephone experiments, battery chemistry, and whatever new idea Edison had scrawled across a notebook page at 3 a.m. But securing the electric lamp patent gave the operation something it hadn't had before: solid legal footing. With that leverage, the center of gravity slowly shifted. The lamp stopped being just another experiment on the schedule and became the anchor for a much larger plan: the plan to build an electrical system the public could actually use. Edison understood instantly what that patent gave him. Not a monopoly on invention, but a powerful negotiating position. While other inventors focused on improving filaments or tweaking designs, Edison focused on assembling the ecosystem around the lamp. Generators needed to be developed. Wiring needed to be sourced in volumes that no supplier had ever handled. Fixtures had to be standardized. Safety systems had to be designed, and someone had to convince skeptical city officials that electricity wasn't a fire hazard waiting to happen. Competitors were already in motion. Joseph Swan in England had his own working lamp. Hiram Maxim and others were developing alternatives. Each had strengths, each had weaknesses. But none had Edison's emerging strategy: build not the bulb, but the platform the bulb depended on. Investors weren't being sold on a household gadget. They were being sold on a future where entire cities were connected to centralized power systems: predictable, billable, and expandable. The patent didn't mean Edison had won, but it meant he had the first real claim to build the business model that could win. And from that moment on, the incandescent lamp started moving from the laboratory bench toward the marketplace that would eventually transform it into a necessity.
Obtén tu diploma de secundaria por ti y por tu familia. Visita completatudiploma.org para encontrar centros educativos gratuitos cerca de ti. Presentado por Dollar General Literacy Foundation y The Ad Council.
The decades that followed didn't belong to the light bulb. They belonged to the system that grew around it. Edison's patent became the foundation of the Edison Electric Light Company, which evolved into the companies that would later help form General Electric. Central generating stations appeared first in New York, then in cities across the country. Entire sectors reshaped themselves. Copper mining scaled up. Glass-making modernized. Insulation manufacturing expanded, and construction practices shifted to accommodate wiring and fixtures that hadn't existed a decade earlier. The infrastructure mattered more than the invention. Standardized sockets allowed mass production. Meters created predictable revenue. Electrical codes turned something experimental into something cities could trust. And what began as a single patent in a clerk's inbox became a blueprint. Build the infrastructure first, then let the innovation follow. Modern utilities would borrow that pattern again and again, from telephones to broadband to renewable energy. Edison didn't do it alone. Teams at Menlo Park ran the experiments. Competitors like Swan pushed the technology forward in parallel. Investors took risks that were anything but certain. Edison's real contribution was stitching those elements together into a coherent, scalable system. He wasn't the solitary genius of popular lore. He was something more durable in the business world, an architect of networks, markets, and strategy. For the clerk who stamped the patent that morning, none of this was obvious. He couldn't possibly imagine cities illuminated at night, or factories running after sunset, or businesses built entirely on the reliable flow of electricity. But the modern world that followed? Electrified streets, nighttime work, electric appliances, global utilities, and the very concept of standardized infrastructure traces back to that moment of leverage. And that shift from scattered experiments to a marketplace built on electrified possibility began on January 27, 1880, the day Thomas Edison was granted the patent for his version of the electric lamp. And hopefully this puts a little less myth and a little more light on who Edison really was. Just give you a heads up, we'll come back to Edison a few times this year, because the truth about the business he built is far more interesting than the legend most people learned. I'm Ron Trucks, and this is Business History, the podcast that finds the turning points behind the headlines. To hear more stories like this, follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen. And if you're enjoying the stories, please don't forget to subscribe and leave a quick review. It helps more people find the story behind the business. And if you want to actually understand business without the fluff, the buzzwords, or the MBA language, start by visiting businessdailypodcast.com.
We all crave something new. At Hertz, new is what we're all about. New adventures, new experiences. When you book with us, you'll be cruising in our newest fleet yet. New features, new tech, and of course, that new car smell. All that wonderful newness, all with no strings attached. So go on, book your new car fling at Hertz.com. Your old car at home never has to know.